If you're drowning in debt and just don't know where to turn, help is available. Attorney Diana Long will help you get your financial situation resolved.
I'm Attorney Diana Long. I'm dedicated to helping hardworking folks just like you. Bankruptcy protection can help you get your financial life back in order, and I can show you how. If you're ready to stop the harassing phone calls and letters, I can help. Call me in Columbia at 442-8123 to schedule your free, no-obligation consultation.
Good morning and welcome to Radio Friends. This is Monday. We start a brand new week, and today is Martin Luther King Day, and I believe today is a state holiday. It's a national holiday.
Absolutely.
Also. There is no mail service today.
That's correct.
And this is Henry Atkinson, by the way, our historian on Radio Friends. There is no mail today.
That's correct.
And are the banks closed?
They are.
The banks are closed today. And what about, we don't know about all the schools.
Schools, check your local listings.
Okay, I like that. That's a good out. But the university does not start class until tomorrow.
That's correct. That's
do they?
tomorrow. You
okay.
got it.
So if you're planning to go to the bank, forget it today, and you can check the mailbox all you want. There's not going to be anything put in it.
That's right.
But let's talk about Martin Luther King Jr. Day. We were talking before we came on. It was passed in 1983,
correct.
Right? Mm-hmm. But you told me it took 3 years to implement?
That's right. A couple reasons for that. One was sort of a condition of passage in the Congress, and part of that was the resistance in some states to really accept Martin Luther King Jr. Day, particularly in the South, and also, interestingly enough, Arizona. A lot of states just weren't necessarily comfortable with having a King holiday. They thought it was odd to elevate King to that level of Washington and Lincoln. So soon, especially after, they thought, after his death, after his assassination, 10, 15 years. And part of it, I think, were lingering issues with the civil rights movement that had not been addressed in people's hearts.
So I can perhaps, I don't agree with it, but I can perhaps see some of the states in the South. But why Arizona?
Well, what people sometimes forget about Arizona is a lot of Southerners moved to Arizona in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s as Arizona grew. I mean, Arizona has grown, especially in the post-World War II era, by leaps and bounds. And a lot of them held those similar attitudes. Now, I don't want to imply that all or most Arizonans are racist. No, but there were issues in terms of dealing with the civil rights movement. I mean, and interestingly enough, there were positive aspects of sort of moving toward Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Strom Thurmond, one of the most famous segregationists in American history, actually supported Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Now, if you told somebody 20 years before that that Strom Thurmond would support Martin Luther King Jr. Day, they would have laughed in your face. I mean, President Reagan was initially resistant to Martin Luther King Jr. Day, but he heard, and Reagan was a smart politician, he heard the groundswell of support for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and it really forced him to rethink some of the sort of thoughts that, and not anything hostile to King, but he'd had sort of more of a libertarian view of civil rights and King, and so it forced him to rethink his view on King and see him as a civil rights champion.
So, did Ronald Reagan then go on the books as supporting Martin Luther King Day?
He's the one that signed it into law with Coretta Scott King standing right by him.
Yeah. Okay. Now, there were some repercussions in Arizona with their resistance to Martin Luther King Day, correct?
They almost lost the Super Bowl over the whole controversy in the early 1990s. Because they still, even in the early 1990s, they had not adopted Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a state holiday. Again, it was a federal holiday, but they had not adopted it as a state holiday. So they almost lost the Super Bowl. And they finally decided to go through it and pass it, but it was bitter controversy in the early 1990s over the whole thing, over Martin Luther King Jr. Day in Arizona. And some states to this day, they'll have Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Well, it's interesting, in a lot of southern states, and it's just interesting to point out, it'll be Lee Jackson King Day. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and Martin Luther King Day.
Yeah. Okay. We're not in that situation here in Missouri.
No.
Personally, I find Martin Luther King is a very inspirational person, and an emotionally inspirational person. When you look back over his life, what would you say, besides the I Have a Dream speech?
That one's an obvious one.
Yeah, besides the I Have a Dream speech. One of the most important contributions that he made to our country and to us.
I would say, and many analysts have pointed this out, his physical courage. I mean, people don't realize that before his assassination. This is a guy, though, who knew he was going, at some point in his life, probably die before he would, before God took him naturally. And this is a guy that had been stabbed, he'd been beaten, he'd been arrested. I mean, when he gave himself for civil rights, those are not idle words. I mean, he literally sacrificed himself for the cause of civil rights.
And I don't think many of us stop to think about that and realize really the courage, the gut-wrenching courage that it took for him to do and say and appear the places that he did.
Oh, yes.
Because, as you said, every time he would step out in front of a crowd, he basically was putting his life on the line.
You got it. I mean, even in, you wouldn't think Chicago, you think Chicago, at least theoretically, be a hospital place for Dr. King, but he went there in 1966 trying to help civil rights activists there. He wasn't successful. But he was willing to take on causes that were either going to be unsuccessful, or in the case of the Vietnam War, which he strongly opposed, very unpopular, very unpopular. Lyndon Johnson had loved Dr. King and then turned on him when King spoke out against the Vietnam War. Because Johnson himself had felt betrayed. But King, that didn't matter to him. He was convinced that he was going to do what he thought was moral, what he thought was right. And that's I mean, there are not many people like that.
If Martin Luther King, no, there aren't a lot of people like that. We need some of those in Washington right now. But if Martin Luther King were alive today, what would he be saying?
I think he would be speaking out about things like income inequality. He'd be talking about, I think in some ways he would be impressed with the progress we've made on civil rights, the fact that we do have, African Americans in high places when it comes to politics, business, culture. That I think he would be impressed with. But I think he would be concerned about both sort of the breakdown of families, regardless of race. And I think he'd be concerned about the progress that had yet to be made. I think in some ways he'd be impressed, and in some ways I think he'd be disappointed.
We had Mary Ratliff on last week, and I said, what do you think he would be doing today? She said he'd be supporting the Wall Street demonstrators. Do you believe that?
I think, let me put it this way, I think that he probably would.
Yeah.
Just knowing Dr. King's politics.
Okay. We're out of time, Henry. Thank you so much for coming by. Pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
Today is Martin Luther King Day. Take a little time to think about what he did contribute to all of us. Our show directed by Travis McMillan, Reynolds Journalism Institute, audio Pat Akers, KBIA. Our floor director is Will Claggett, and our assistant producer and guest coordinator, Uncle James Mauser. Bye-bye.